The laughter echoed across the marble foyer as I pushed through the mahogany doors, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. My cousin Bradley nearly choked on his champagne, pointing at my wrinkled jeans and faded t-shirt. "Did you seriously walk here, Marcus?" he wheezed between fits of laughter. "To grandfather's 80th birthday? Looking like that? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." But in exactly 17 minutes, that same laughter would die in their throats when men in black suits would silently emerge from every corner of the Whitmore estate, and my family would finally understand who I really was. The invitation had been simple enough. Elegant cream cardstock with gold lettering, requesting my presence at Theodore Whitmore's 80th birthday celebration at the family estate in Newport. What it didn't mention was the unspoken dress code that everyone except me seemed to understand. As I stood in the entrance hall taking in the crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, I realized I was drastically underdressed. My Aunt Patricia appeared first, her silk dress rustling as she descended the grand staircase. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her chest in theatrical shock. "Oh my goodness, Marcus, what on earth happened to you? Did your car break down?" "I walked," I said simply, brushing a piece of lint from my sleeve. The words seemed to hang in the air like a confession of some terrible crime. Patricia's eyes widened, and she called over to her husband, Richard, come quickly! Marcus walked here." Uncle Richard emerged from the library, scotch in hand, his face already flushed from the evening's festivities. Behind him trailed my cousins, Bradley with his perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit, and his sister Emma, who looked like she'd stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. They formed a small semicircle around me, as if I were some exotic creature that had wandered in from the wilderness. "Walked?" Richard repeated, his voice carrying the same tone one might use to say murdered or embezzled. "From where?" "From downtown Providence," I replied. "It's only about 12 miles. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley was the first to break, erupting into that braying laugh that had annoyed me since childhood. 12 miles? In those shoes?" He gestured at my well-worn Converse sneakers. "Marcus, you're insane!" Emma shook her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "I mean, couldn't you have at least called an Uber? Or asked someone for a ride? This is so embarrassing." More family members began to gather, drawn by the commotion. My great-aunt Dolores hobbled over with her walking stick, squinting at me through her thick glasses. "Is this one of the catering staff?" she asked loudly. "Why is he in the front entrance?" "No, Aunt Dolores," Patricia said with strained patience. "This is Marcus. He's family. He walked here, from Providence." Dolores adjusted her glasses and peered at me more closely. "Walked? In this weather? What's wrong with him?" The questions came rapid fire after that. Had I lost my job? Was I having financial troubles? Did I need money for gas? Each inquiry felt like another small cut, another reminder that I didn't belong in their world of luxury cars and designer clothes and houses with names instead of addresses. My cousin Bradley, still chuckling, put his arm around me in a patronizing gesture. "Look, Marcus, I get it. Times are tough for everyone. But there are appearances to maintain, you know, especially tonight. Grandfather's got some important guests coming. Politicians, business leaders. You can't just show up looking like you've been hiking the Appalachian Trail." "I look fine," I said quietly. "Fine?" Emma laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Marcus, you're wearing a t-shirt that says Rhode Island Clam Shack to our grandfather's 80th birthday party. The governor is supposed to be here tonight." That caught my attention, though I tried not to show it. "Governor Harrison is coming?" "See?" Bradley said triumphantly. "Even you know how important this is, and here you are, dressed like you're going to a barbecue." The crowd around me continued to grow. My Uncle James appeared with his wife Susan, both of them taking in my appearance with barely concealed horror. My cousin Michael, Bradley's older brother, emerged from the drawing room with several people I didn't recognize, family friends or business associates, all immaculately dressed and now staring at me like I was a stain on the family reputation. Maybe we can find him something to wear, Susan suggested in a whisper that wasn't quite quiet enough. James has extra suits upstairs. I don't think they'll fit, Patricia replied in the same stage whisper. Marcus has always been different-sized than the rest of the family. The conversation continued around me as if I weren't there. They discussed my clothing options, my financial situation, and my apparent inability to understand social norms. Someone suggested I could wait in the kitchen until more appropriate attire was found. Another voice proposed I simply leave and return when I was properly prepared for such an occasion. Throughout it all, I stood quietly, letting their words wash over me like rain. They had no idea. None of them had any clue about the phone calls I'd been receiving all week, the security briefings I'd attended, the reason I'd chosen to walk those 12 miles instead of arriving in the motorcade that was currently parked 2 blocks away. Theodore Whitmore himself finally made his appearance, descending the staircase with dignity befitting his 80 years and considerable fortune. The family immediately shifted their attention to him, their voices dropping to respectful murmurs. He was an impressive figure even at his age, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that commanded rooms. His eyes found mine across the crowded foyer, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Approval? It was gone too quickly to interpret. "Grandfather," Bradley said, stepping forward, "we were just discussing Marcus's transportation situation." Theodore's gaze moved to Bradley, then back to me. "Transportation?" "He walked here, Grandpa," Emma explained, her voice carrying that same apologetic tone one might use to explain a pet's misbehavior. "All the way from Providence. We're trying to figure out what to do about his clothes." The old man studied me for a long moment, taking in my casual attire, my slightly wind-blown hair, the small backpack I'd carried for the journey. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and calm. "How long did it take you to walk 12 miles, Marcus?" The question surprised everyone, including me. "About 3.5 hours, sir. I stopped for coffee once." He nodded slowly. "And you chose to walk because—" I could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on me. The honest answer would have ended everything right there, would have revealed secrets that weren't mine to tell, so I gave them a different truth. "I wanted to clear my head before tonight. Sometimes walking helps me think." Theodore's expression remained unreadable. "And what were you thinking about during those 3.5 hours?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around us, the family waited for my answer, some still smirking, others looking genuinely curious about what could possibly occupy the mind of someone eccentric enough to walk to a formal dinner party. What I'd actually been thinking about was the briefing I'd received that morning, the intelligence reports I'd reviewed, the careful choreography that would unfold over the next hour. But I couldn't tell them that. "Family," I said finally. "I was thinking about family." Theodore's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly at my answer. For a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes that looked like understanding, maybe even pride. But before he could respond, Bradley stepped forward with that insufferable smirk plastered across his face. "Family, huh?" Bradley said, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "Well, if you really cared about family, you'd have shown up looking respectable. Do you have any idea how this reflects on all of us?" The gathered relatives murmured their agreement, creating a chorus of disapproval that echoed through the marble halls. I caught fragments of their whispered conversations, words like embarrassing, inappropriate, and always been the odd one. They spoke as if my presence alone might somehow taint their carefully curated evening. "Perhaps," said a voice from behind the crowd, "we should focus on what truly matters tonight." Everyone turned toward the source of the voice. A woman in her 50s approached us, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a navy blue dress that spoke of quiet authority rather than flashy wealth. I recognized her immediately, though my family clearly didn't. "I'm sorry," Patricia said with forced politeness, "but I don't believe we've been introduced. Are you one of Theodore's business associates?" The woman extended her hand with a gracious smile. "Catherine Brennan. I work in government relations. Your grandfather was kind enough to invite me tonight." What she didn't mention was that Catherine Brennan was the Deputy Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, and that her presence here had nothing to do with Theodore's birthday celebration. She was part of the advance team, preparing for what would happen in exactly 14 minutes. Government relations, Richard repeated, clearly trying to place her in his mental hierarchy of important people. Local or federal? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Federal, Catherine replied simply, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment. There was a slight nod, so subtle that only I would notice it. Everything was proceeding according to plan. How fascinating, Emma said, suddenly interested. What department do you work for? Executive branch, Catherine answered vaguely, then turned her attention to Theodore. Mr. Whitmore, your home is absolutely stunning. The security arrangements seem quite thorough. Another coded message. She was confirming that the perimeter teams were in position. Bradley, not one to be ignored for long, inserted himself back into the conversation. Well, Ms. Brennan, I hope you'll excuse our family drama. My cousin here seems to think formal occasions are appropriate for hiking attire. Catherine's gaze shifted to me, taking in my casual clothes with what appeared to be polite interest. Sometimes the most important people travel in ways we least expect, she said diplomatically. Important people? James scoffed. Marcus works at some little tech startup downtown. Nothing against technology, of course, but hardly what you'd call important. I felt the familiar weight of their assumptions settling around me like a heavy coat. They saw what they expected to see. The family disappointment, the one who never quite measured up to their standards of success. In their world, importance was measured by the size of your house, the price of your car, and the prestige of your job title. A tech startup, Catherine mused. How interesting. What kind of work do you do there, Marcus? The question was perfectly innocent to everyone else, but I understood what she was really asking. She was giving me an opportunity to hint at the truth without revealing classified information. Cybersecurity consulting, I said. We help organizations protect their digital infrastructure. It wasn't technically a lie. It was just a very simplified version of what my team and I actually did for the Department of Homeland Security. Cybersecurity, Theodore repeated thoughtfully. That's becoming quite important these days, isn't it? More important than most people realize, I replied. Great Aunt Dolores, who had been listening with growing confusion, waved her walking stick dismissively. All this computer nonsense. In my day, security meant locking your front door and knowing your neighbors. Times have changed, Aunt Dolores, Michael said with patronizing patience. Though I have to admit, I'm not sure how walking 12 miles in sneakers relates to computer security. The comment drew more chuckles from the assembled family members. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it discreetly. T-12 minutes. Package arriving on schedule. Agent Rivera. Marcus, Susan said sharply, it's incredibly rude to check your phone during a conversation. Sorry, I said, slipping the device back into my pocket. Work emergency. On a Saturday evening? Patricia asked skeptically. What kind of emergency could there possibly be at a computer company? Catherine stepped in smoothly. Cybersecurity threats don't follow business hours, I'm afraid. Hackers tend to strike when they think people aren't paying attention. Exactly, I said, grateful for the cover she was providing. Emma rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh please, what's the worst that could happen? Someone steals a few passwords? It's not like you're protecting nuclear launch codes or anything. If only she knew. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, surrounded by family members who saw me as a failure and an embarrassment, while 12 blocks away, a motorcade was making its final preparations for arrival. In 10 minutes, this house would be swarming with Secret Service agents, and my relatives would learn that their disappointing cousin had been personally selected to brief the President of the United States on a cyber threat that could cripple the nation's infrastructure. Hey, Fidjeth. You know what I think? Bradley said, warming up for what I could tell would be another condescending speech. I think Marcus enjoys being different. He likes being the black sheep, the one who doesn't fit in. It gives him an excuse not to try. That's enough, Bradley, Theodore said quietly, but his grandson was just getting started. No, Grandpa, someone needs to say it. Look at him. He shows up to your 80th birthday party, dressed like he's going to mow the lawn, claims he walked here from Providence like some kind of pilgrim, and then spends the evening checking his phone for work emergencies at his little computer job. It's disrespectful. The words stung more than I cared to admit, partly because they contained a grain of truth. I had always been different from them, had always chosen a path that they couldn't understand or appreciate. But their definition of success and mine had diverged years ago, when I realized that protecting people mattered more than impressing them. "You're right," I said quietly. "I am different from all of you." Bradley smiled triumphantly as if he'd won some kind of victory. Finally, in admission of, "I'm different because I chose service over profit," I continued. "I chose protecting people over protecting bank accounts. I chose working for something bigger than myself instead of working for a bigger house." The foyer fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of the party from the other rooms seemed to fade away. "That's very noble," Richard said with barely concealed sarcasm. "But nobility doesn't pay the bills, Marcus. And it certainly doesn't excuse showing up to family events looking like a vagrant." "Perhaps," Catherine interjected gently, "we should consider that there might be more to Marcus's story than meets the eye." "Such as?" Emma challenged. Catherine smiled mysteriously. "Sometimes the people who appear the most ordinary are actually the most extraordinary." My phone buzzed again. This time I didn't even look at it, but I knew what it said. 7 minutes. "More riddles," James muttered. "Look, Ms. Brennan, I appreciate that you're trying to be diplomatic. But we know Marcus. He's family. And family doesn't lie to family. If he were involved in anything truly important, we'd know about it." "Would you?" Catherine asked. "In my experience, the most important work is often the most secret." Theodore had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Now he stepped closer to me, studying my face with the sharp intelligence that had built his business empire. "Marcus," he said slowly, "is there something you're not telling us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around me, I could feel the weight of expectation, curiosity, and skepticism. They wanted an answer, but they wouldn't believe the truth even if I told them. "There's a lot I don't tell you," I said honestly. "There's a lot I can't tell you." "Can't or won't?" Bradley pressed. "Both." Emma laughed, but it sounded forced now. "Oh, come on! What could you possibly be involved in that's so secretive? Are you working for the CIA now?" The guess was close enough to make me uncomfortable. "I work in cybersecurity," I repeated. "Some of our clients require confidentiality agreements." "Clients like who?" Michael demanded. "Google? Apple? Microsoft?" I glanced at Catherine, who gave me the slightest shake of her head. "Not yet." "I can't discuss specific clients," I said. "Of course you can't," Bradley said with exaggerated patience. "How convenient." "The black sheep of the family claims to have some mysterious important job, but he can't tell us anything about it. And we're supposed to just take his word for it, while he shows up looking like he slept under a bridge." "You know what I think?" Susan added. "I think Marcus is having some kind of breakdown. All this talk about secret work and classified clients. It sounds like fantasy. Maybe he's been watching too many spy movies." The suggestions came fast after that. Maybe I needed professional help. Maybe I was having financial problems and was too proud to ask for assistance. Maybe I was on drugs. Each theory was more insulting than the last, but I endured them all in silence. What they didn't understand was that in 5 minutes, their theories would become irrelevant. In 5 minutes, everything would change. "I have an idea," Patricia announced. "Why don't we find Marcus something appropriate to wear, and then we can all move past this unpleasantness. I'm sure James has a suit that would fit." "That's very kind of you, Aunt Patricia," I said, "but I'm comfortable with what I'm wearing." "Comfortable?" she repeated incredulously. "Marcus, the governor is going to be here. You can't meet Governor Harrison dressed like that." My phone buzzed a third time. 4 minutes. This time I did check the message, and what I read made my pulse quicken. "Perimeter secure. Eagle is airborne. Arrival imminent. Confirm your position. Agent Rivera." I typed back quickly. "In position. Family secured. Ready for arrival." "Work again?" Emma asked sarcastically. "Something like that," I replied, slipping the phone away. Catherine was watching me carefully now, and I could see the tension in her posture. She was as aware as I was that we were in the final countdown. In less than 4 minutes, The careful fiction we'd all been maintaining would come to an end. "You know what?" Bradley said, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm tired of this whole charade. Marcus, either tell us what's really going on or stop pretending you're some kind of secret agent. This is a family, not some spy novel." I looked at him for a long moment, then at the faces surrounding me. Faces filled with skepticism, disappointment, and barely concealed contempt. These were the people who had shaped my childhood, who had attended my birthday parties and graduation ceremonies, who thought they knew everything there was to know about me. "You're right, Bradley," I said finally. "This isn't a spy novel." "Thank you," he said, looking vindicated. "This is real life," I continued. "And in real life, sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones you don't know at all." Before anyone could respond to that cryptic statement, the sound of helicopters filled the air above the Whitmore estate. Everyone froze, looking up at the ceiling as if they could see through it to the sky above. The sound was unmistakable. Multiple aircraft flying in formation, approaching fast. "What in the world?" Theodore muttered. Catherine checked her watch and smiled. "Right on time." The sound of helicopters grew louder, closer, until it seemed like the entire house was vibrating with their mechanical thunder. Through the tall windows we could see searchlights cutting through the evening darkness, sweeping across the manicured gardens with military precision. "Military exercises?" Richard suggested weakly, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "In Newport?" Patricia's face had gone pale. "Over a residential area?" Emma grabbed her phone and started recording through the window. "This is insane! Are we under attack or something?" The helicopters circled the estate twice, before beginning their descent toward the expansive lawn behind the house. The sound was overwhelming now, a rhythmic pounding that made conversation impossible. Crystal glasses rattled on nearby tables, and several of the older oil paintings shifted slightly in their frames. Great Aunt Dolores had pressed herself against the wall, her walking stick clutched in both hands like a weapon. "Theodore!" she shouted over the noise. "What is happening? Are we at war?" But Theodore wasn't looking at the helicopters. His eyes were fixed on me, and I could see the wheels turning in his sharp mind. He was beginning to piece together the puzzle that everyone else was still scrambling to understand. The helicopters touched down, and slowly, mercifully, the engines began to wind down. In the relative quiet that followed, we could hear new sounds: car doors slamming, radios crackling, and the unmistakable sound of many footsteps moving with purpose across gravel. "Marcus," Theodore said quietly, his voice cutting through the family's panicked chatter, "I think it's time you told us what's really going on." Before I could answer, the front doorbell rang. Not the melodic chimes that usually announce the arrival of dinner guests, but a sharp, authoritative sound that somehow conveyed urgency and importance. "Should we answer it?" Susan whispered, as if the people outside might not know we were home. "I'll get it," I said, moving toward the door. "You?" Bradley grabbed my arm. "Marcus, you're wearing a t-shirt! What if it's someone important?" I gently removed his hand from my arm. "Trust me, Bradley, I've got this." The family followed me toward the entrance in a tight cluster, like sheep, seeking safety in numbers. Through the frosted glass panels beside the door, we could see multiple figures standing on the porch. Tall, dark silhouettes that radiated authority, even in shadow. I reached for the door handle, paused for just a moment to gather myself, and then pulled it open. Standing on the threshold were 6 men and women in identical dark suits, earpieces clearly visible, their eyes constantly scanning the area behind us. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect, stepped forward. "Good evening," she said in a crisp, professional tone. "Agent Rebecca Morrison, United States Secret Service. We're here for Marcus Whitmore." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway behind us. My family stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Secret Service?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Agent Morrison's eyes found mine. "Mr. Whitmore, we're ready when you are. The president is waiting." And there it was. The words that would change everything, that would shatter every assumption my family had made, About me, about my life, about who I really was. The president? Patricia's voice cracked on the second word. Marcus, Agent Morrison continued, we need to move. POTUS is on a tight schedule, and the briefing materials are already loaded in the secure vehicle. I nodded, my heart racing despite all the preparation and rehearsal. Of course, let me just grab my bag. I turned back toward my family, and the expressions on their faces were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the first dawning of understanding. Wait, Bradley said, his voice strange and hollow. Wait. The president? As in, the president of the United States? Agent Morrison's expression didn't change. President Martinez is waiting to meet with Mr. Whitmore regarding a matter of national security. We need to leave now. National security? Richard repeated faintly. I picked up my backpack from where I'd set it down earlier, the same worn bag that had drawn so many disapproving looks. Inside were classified documents, encrypted drives, and briefing materials that detailed a cyber attack so sophisticated it had taken our best analysts 3 weeks to fully understand its scope. Marcus, Theodore said, and there was something different in his voice now, something that sounded almost like awe. What exactly do you do for work? Before I could answer, more Secret Service agents appeared in the doorway behind Agent Morrison. I recognized Agent Rivera, who had been texting me updates all evening, and Agent Chen, who had personally vetted every member of my family for security clearance. Mr. Whitmore, Agent Rivera said, we've completed the perimeter sweep. The house is secure, and your family has been cleared to remain in the residence during the meeting. Cleared? Susan's voice was barely a whisper. We've been investigated? Agent Chen consulted a tablet he was carrying. Standard background checks for all family members in proximity to a presidential security event. Everyone came back clean. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in around the room. They hadn't just shown up randomly. This had been planned, coordinated, prepared for. My family had been vetted by federal agents without even knowing it. How long? Theodore asked, his businessman's mind cutting straight to the essential question. How long have you been planning this? The meeting was scheduled 3 days ago, Agent Morrison replied. But Mr. Whitmore has been working with federal agencies for the past 18 months. 18 months. I watched as my family tried to process that timeline, tried to reconcile it with their memories of family gatherings where they'd patronized me, pitied me, dismissed me as the unsuccessful cousin who couldn't even afford a car. 18 months, Emma repeated numbly. But you said you worked at a tech startup. I do, I said. We're contracted by the Department of Homeland Security. We identify and neutralize cyber threats against critical infrastructure. Neutralize, Michael said slowly. What does that mean? Agent Morrison checked her watch, a subtle reminder that we were operating on presidential time. Mr. Whitmore leads a team of cyber specialists who have prevented 17 major attacks on U.S. infrastructure in the past year alone. The work he'll be briefing the president on tonight involves a state-sponsored attack that could have taken down the entire East Coast power grid. The power grid. I could see my family trying to wrap their minds around the scope of what Agent Morrison was describing. Bradley, who had mocked my Rhode Island Clam Shack t-shirt just minutes earlier, now looked like he was going to be sick. 17 attacks, Patricia whispered, and we never heard anything about them on the news. That's the point, I said. You stop them before they become news. Agent Rivera stepped forward. Sir, we really need to move. Marine One is standing by and the president has already been briefed on your preliminary findings. Marine One. The presidential helicopter. I was about to fly to a secure location and personally brief the President of the United States on a cyber attack that could cripple the nation, and my family was just now learning that I was more than a failed cousin with a computer hobby. Wait, Bradley said desperately. This is crazy. Marcus, you can't be. You walked here. You walked 12 miles in sneakers. How does someone who briefs the president walk to a family dinner? Agent Morrison almost smiled at that. Mr. Whitmore specifically requested to arrive independently tonight. He wanted to maintain the cover of a normal family visit until the last possible moment. Cover? Great Aunt Dolores had found her voice again. Are you telling me that Marcus is some kind of spy? Not a spy. Agent Chen corrected. A cybersecurity specialist with top-secret clearance who reports directly to the National Security Council when situations require presidential attention. The National Security Council. Even I felt a thrill at hearing those words spoken aloud in front of my family. For so long I'd carried the weight of my secret life alone, watching them judge me based on appearances while knowing I couldn't defend myself without revealing classified information. Top secret clearance, Theodore repeated, and I could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about his grandson. Marcus, when did this happen? When did you become this? It didn't happen all at once, I said. It started in college, with an internship at a government lab. Then graduate work funded by NSA grants. Then consulting work that gradually became more classified, more critical. But you never said anything, Susan protested. All these years, you let us think. I'll let you think about what the security protocols required you to think, I replied. I couldn't tell you the truth without putting you at risk. Agent Morrison was getting impatient now, her professional demeanor becoming more insistent. Mr. Whitmore, we're now 7 minutes behind schedule. The president is waiting. I shouldered my backpack and started toward the door, but Emma's voice stopped me. Marcus, wait, the walking thing. Why did you really walk here tonight? I paused in the doorway, surrounded by Secret Service agents, about to leave for the most important meeting of my career. My family stood clustered together in the foyer of Theodore's mansion, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of pride. I walked, I said, because I wanted to clear my head before the briefing, and because I knew that in about an hour everything would change between us. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be just Marcus, the disappointment, the black sheep, the one who never quite measured up. Because after tonight, Marcus will be gone forever. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. There was no going back now, no returning to the comfortable fiction that had protected both my work and my family for so long. Will you? Patricia started, then stopped, as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask the question. Will I do what? Will you be safe? The question caught me off guard. In all the years of family gatherings, through all the subtle criticisms and disappointed looks, I'd never heard her sound worried about me. I'm always as safe as the situation allows, I said honestly. Agent Morrison stepped aside to let me pass. Sir, the motorcade is waiting. As I walked through the door, I heard Theodore's voice behind me, strong and clear. Marcus. I turned back. Make us proud. The words followed me as I walked down the front steps, past the fountain where I'd played as a child, toward the black SUVs that would take me to a helicopter that would take me to the president. Behind me, I could hear my family's voices, full of questions they'd never thought to ask before. What kind of attacks had I stopped? How long had the government been watching our family? Was this why I'd never seemed to care about money or status symbols? Had I been protecting them all along without them knowing it? The answers to those questions would have to wait. Right now, the president was waiting, and the security of the nation's power grid hung in the balance. But as I climbed into the back of the lead vehicle, I allowed myself one moment to savor the looks on their faces when Agent Morrison had said those magic words. We're here for Marcus Whitmore. After years of being underestimated, dismissed, and patronized, I had finally been seen for who I really was. The motorcade began to move, and through the bulletproof windows I could see my family still standing in the doorway, watching me disappear into the night on presidential business. It would be a long time before any of them laughed at someone arriving on foot again. The ride to the helicopter landing zone took exactly 4 minutes through Newport's winding coastal roads. Inside the armored SUV, Agent Morrison briefed me on the evening security protocols, while Agent Rivera reviewed the latest intelligence updates on his secure tablet. The familiar routine helped calm my nerves, though nothing could completely eliminate the adrenaline coursing through my system. The president received your preliminary assessment 2 hours ago, Agent Morrison said, her voice professional but tinged with urgency. She has questions about the timeline and wants to understand the full scope of potential targets. President Martinez. Even after 18 months of security clearances and classified briefings, the reality of personally advising the leader of the free world never quite felt normal. Tonight's situation was different, though more critical than anything I'd handled before. Has the NSC been fully briefed on the Beijing connection? I asked, checking the encrypted files on my own device. Partially, Agent Rivera replied without looking up. Director Harrison wanted you to present the evidence directly. Some of the technical details are beyond the scope of a standard briefing. The Beijing connection. 3 weeks ago, my team had traced a series of seemingly random cyber probes to a sophisticated network operating out of China's Ministry of State Security. What had started as routine monitoring of power grid vulnerabilities had uncovered something far more sinister, a coordinated attack designed to simultaneously cripple infrastructure across 17 states. Any changes in the threat assessment since this afternoon? I asked. Agent Morrison shook her head. Still code orange. The attack vectors remain dormant, but our analysts believe activation could happen at any time. That's why the president wanted this briefing moved up. Code orange. One step below the highest alert level. I thought about my family back at the estate, probably still standing in that foyer trying to process what they'd witnessed. They had no idea how close the country had come to a catastrophic infrastructure failure, or that their disappointing cousin was one of the few people standing between normal life and nationwide chaos. The motorcade turned into a private airfield, where Marine One sat waiting on the tarmac like a green and white symbol of American power. The presidential helicopter was smaller than most people imagined, but its presence commanded respect. Tonight it would carry me to a secure facility where the most powerful person in the world would rely on my expertise to make decisions that could affect millions of lives. Mr. Whitmore, Agent Morrison said as we approached the aircraft, remember that you're not just briefing the president tonight. Secretary of Defense Williams will be present, along with NSA Director Foster and General Patterson from Cyber Command. This is a full National Security Council meeting. The weight of those names settled on my shoulders. These were people I'd only seen on television or read about in classified reports. Tonight, I would sit across from them and explain technical vulnerabilities, using language they could understand and act upon. The helicopter's engines were already spinning up as we climbed aboard. I strapped myself into the designated seat, placed my encrypted briefcase at my feet, and tried to ignore the butterflies performing aerial maneuvers in my stomach. Through the small window, I could see Newport's lights growing smaller as we lifted off into the night sky. 15 minutes later, we touched down at a facility that didn't officially exist on any public maps. The building was low and unremarkable from the outside, designed to blend into the surrounding landscape. But I knew that beneath its mundane exterior lay some of the most advanced communication and analysis equipment in the world. Agent Morrison escorted me through multiple security checkpoints, each one more sophisticated than the last. Biometric scanners, metal detectors, and at least 3 different types of identification verification. By the time we reached the main briefing room, I'd been thoroughly confirmed as Marcus Whitmore, Level 5 security clearance, authorized for presidential briefings on cyber infrastructure threats. The briefing room was smaller than I'd expected, dominated by a polished conference table surrounded by leather chairs. Multiple screens covered the walls, displaying everything from satellite feeds to real-time network monitoring data. The American flag stood in one corner, while the presidential seal was embedded in the carpet beneath the table. "She'll be with you in just a moment," Agent Morrison said, then stepped outside, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the quiet hum of electronic equipment. I opened my briefcase and began arranging the presentation materials I'd spent 3 days preparing: technical diagrams, threat assessment charts, timeline projections, and recommendations for immediate action. Each document represented hours of analysis by some of the brightest minds in cybersecurity, all condensed into language that could inform split-second decisions at the highest levels of government. The door opened, and President Maria Martinez entered the room with the confident stride that had carried her through a distinguished career in public service. She was smaller in person than she appeared on television, but her presence filled the space immediately. Behind her came a parade of officials whose faces I recognized from cabinet meetings and national security briefings. "Mr. Whitmore," the president said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Thank you for making yourself available on such short notice. I understand you were at a family gathering." "Yes, ma'am, my grandfather's 80th birthday." "I hope we didn't cause too much disruption," she said, and I could tell she genuinely meant it. Family occasions are important. They'll understand, I replied, thinking of the shocked faces I'd left behind at the estate. Secretary Williams, a tall man with graying hair and intense eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, we've reviewed your preliminary findings, but I have to say, the scope of what you're describing seems almost unbelievable. Are you certain about these threat vectors? Absolutely certain, sir. My team has verified the data through multiple independent sources. General Patterson, whose uniform displayed more ribbons than I could count, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Son, I've been dealing with military threats for 30 years. What you're suggesting would require a level of coordination and technical sophistication that most nation-states simply don't possess. This was the challenge I'd expected. Military leaders understood conventional threats: bombs, missiles, troops. Cyber warfare operated by different rules, using weapons that existed only in code and attacked infrastructure most people never thought about. General, with respect, that's exactly what makes this threat so dangerous, I said, activating the main display screen. The attackers are counting on that assumption. The screen came alive with a complex network diagram showing power grids, communication systems, and transportation hubs across the eastern United States. Red markers indicated confirmed infiltration points, while yellow markers showed probable vulnerabilities. 3 weeks ago, we detected unusual activity in the supervisory control systems of power substations in Virginia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, I began. Initially, it appeared to be routine maintenance probes, the kind of diagnostic checks that happen thousands of times per day. President Martinez studied the display with obvious concentration. But they weren't routine. No, ma'am, they were reconnaissance missions. Someone was mapping our electrical infrastructure with extraordinary precision, identifying single points of failure that could cascade into regional blackouts. NSA Director Foster, a woman whose reputation for analytical brilliance was legendary in intelligence circles, pulled up additional data on her tablet. Your report mentions Beijing as the source. How confident are we in that attribution? 97% confident, I replied. The attack signatures match known tools developed by the MSS 3rd Department. But here's what makes this different. They're not just gathering intelligence. They've actually installed dormant malware in critical systems. The room fell silent. Installing malware was an act of cyber warfare, not espionage. Dormant? Secretary Williams asked. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning they have the ability to trigger coordinated infrastructure failures across multiple states simultaneously. Power grids, communication networks, water treatment facilities, transportation control systems. They could effectively paralyze the East Coast without firing a single shot. General Patterson's skepticism had transformed into grim attention. What kind of timeline are we looking at? That's the problem, sir. We don't know. The malware is designed to activate on command, which means the timing is entirely at their discretion. It could be tonight, next week, or next year. President Martinez walked closer to the display, studying the network of red and yellow markers. What would be the immediate impact if they activated these attacks? I had hoped she wouldn't ask that question, but I'd prepared for it anyway. In the first hour, approximately 40 million people would lose electrical power. Communication systems would fail across 7 states. Water treatment plants would shut down. Air traffic control systems would go offline. And after the first hour, she pressed, cascading failures would spread to adjacent systems. Emergency services would be overwhelmed. Hospitals would operate on backup power until their generators failed. The economic impact would exceed the 2008 financial crisis within the first week. The numbers hung in the air like a physical weight. These weren't abstract statistics. They represented human lives, economic stability, and national security on a scale that made conventional military threats seem almost quaint by comparison. Jesus, Secretary Williams muttered, how do we stop something like this? That's why I'm here, I said, pulling up the next set of documents. We've identified the command and control servers responsible for managing the malware. If we can neutralize those servers, we can prevent the attacks from being activated. Neutralize how? General Patterson asked. A coordinated cyber counterattack. My team has developed targeted viruses that can destroy the command servers without affecting surrounding systems. But it requires presidential authorization because some of the servers are located on foreign soil. President Martinez turned from the display to look directly at me. You're talking about launching offensive cyber warfare against Chinese infrastructure. Yes, ma'am, limited and targeted, but yes. The implications of what I was suggesting were enormous. Cyber warfare existed in a legal and diplomatic gray area that made conventional military action seem straightforward by comparison. Attacking foreign computer systems could be interpreted as an act of war, even if no physical damage occurred. What are the risks if we don't act? Director Foster asked. Catastrophic, I replied without hesitation. If they activate the malware, we could be looking at infrastructure damage that takes months or years to fully repair. The human cost would be measured in lives lost due to hospital failures, transportation accidents, and breakdown of essential services. And if we do act, we prevent a potential catastrophe, but we also escalate tensions with Beijing and potentially trigger a cyber warfare arms race that could destabilize international relations for decades. President Martinez walked back to her chair but remained standing. Mr. Whitmore, in your professional opinion, what's the probability that China will actually activate these attacks? It was the question that had kept me awake for 3 nights running. Based on current geopolitical tensions and their historical patterns of cyber aggression, I estimate a 65% probability of activation within the next 30 days. 65%, she repeated. Those aren't comfortable odds. No, ma'am, they're not. The president looked around the room, making eye contact with each of her advisors. I need options. Mr. Whitmore, can your counterattack be ready within 24 hours? It's ready now, ma'am. We've been prepared to execute on your authorization for the past week. Diplomatic alternatives? She asked Secretary Williams. We could reach out through back channels, let Beijing know we're aware of their capabilities, and demand they stand down the malware. But that reveals our detection capabilities and gives them time to adapt their attack methods. General Patterson leaned back in his chair. We could also increase the alert status for critical infrastructure and implement enhanced security protocols. Make their attacks less likely to succeed. Which warns them that we know something, Director Foster pointed out, and might prompt them to activate the attacks before we can fully prepare our defenses. The debate continued for 20 minutes, with each option presenting its own set of risks and complications. I found myself in the surreal position of watching the highest levels of government wrestle with a problem that had originated in lines of code written by programmers half a world away. Finally, President Martinez called for quiet. Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something that isn't in your briefing materials. Yes, ma'am? If this were your family at risk, if your grandfather's house were going to lose power for weeks, if your cousins couldn't get medical care, if your aunts and uncles were trapped in cities without functioning infrastructure, what would you recommend? The question cut straight to the heart of everything. I thought about the family I'd left at the estate, still trying to process the revelation of my secret life. I thought about millions of other families who had no idea their normal lives hung in the balance of decisions being made in this windowless room. I would recommend immediate authorization for the counterattack, ma'am. The risk of inaction far outweighs the risks of acting. President Martinez nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have our answer. The president's words echoed in the silence of the briefing room. Authorization granted. Mr. Whitmore, how long do you need to execute the counterattack? I checked my secure phone, where my team had been standing by for the past hour. 12 minutes to establish secure connections to all target servers. Another 8 minutes for the viruses to propagate and complete their mission. Total execution time, 20 minutes. Do it, she said simply. Those 2 words unleashed the most sophisticated cyber warfare operation in American history. I activated the encrypted communication link to my team's command center, where Dr. Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, and 5 other specialists had been waiting for this moment. Control, this is Whitmore. We have presidential authorization. Execute Operation Firewall immediately. Copy that, Marcus. Beginning penetration sequence now. Dr. Chen's voice was calm and focused, despite the magnitude of what we were about to attempt. On the screens around us, lines of code began scrolling as my team initiated attacks against 17 different server farms across 3 continents. President Martinez remained standing, her eyes fixed on the displays showing real-time progress of our cyber assault. "Mr. Whitmore, talk me through what's happening." "Yes, ma'am. My team is currently bypassing the security protocols on the command and control servers that manage the malware embedded in our infrastructure. Each server requires a different approach because they're using varied defensive measures." The main screen showed a world map with pulsing dots representing our targets. Green dots indicated successful penetration, yellow showed active engagement, and red-marked servers still defended. "Beijing server farm is proving resistant," Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez reported through the comm. "They've got military-grade encryption and active countermeasures, switching to penetration method Delta." Secretary Williams leaned forward. "What happens if they detect our attack before we complete it?" "They could trigger the malware immediately," I admitted. "That's why speed is essential. We need to neutralize all 17 command nodes before they realize what's happening." 4 dots turned green simultaneously, then 2 more. "Shanghai facility is down," Dr. Chen announced. "That's 8 of 17 neutralized." General Patterson watched the progress with obvious tension. "This is like watching a surgical operation, except the patient could die if we make one wrong move." 9 down, came Rodriguez's voice. "But we're getting pushback from the Guangzhou servers. They're adapting their defenses in real time." This was the nightmare scenario we'd prepared for but hoped to avoid. The Chinese systems were learning from our attacks and evolving their countermeasures. It was like fighting an opponent who could change the rules of engagement in the middle of the battle. "Can you overcome their adaptations?" President Martinez asked. "We're about to find out," I replied, then spoke into my comm. "Control, deploy the adaptive algorithms. Full spectrum approach." "Deploying now." This might get bumpy. On the screens, the code streams became more chaotic, as our viruses began morphing their attack vectors in real time, matching the defenders' adaptations with countermeasures of our own. It was artificial intelligence warfare at its most sophisticated level. 10 down, Dr. Chen's excitement was audible. 11, the adaptive approach is working. But something was wrong. One of the yellow dots on our map had turned red, then orange, then began flashing. "Marcus," Rodriguez's voice carried a note of alarm. "The Shenzhen facility just went active. They're trying to activate the malware in our systems." "How long do we have?" I asked, my hands flying across my keyboard to assist the countermeasures. "Unknown. Could be 30 seconds, could be 30 minutes. Their activation sequence is encrypted." President Martinez moved closer to my position. "Can you stop the activation?" "I'm trying, ma'am, but we need to complete our mission before they finish theirs." The race was on. Our viruses against their activation protocols. Offense versus defense in cyberspace, with the infrastructure of the eastern United States hanging in the balance. 12 down, Dr. Chen reported. 13. But the flashing orange dot was getting brighter, indicating increased activity from the Shenzhen facility. "They're pushing hard on the activation sequence," Rodriguez warned. "I'm seeing probing attacks against power substations in Virginia and North Carolina." Director Foster pulled up additional monitoring data on her tablet. "Confirmed. We're detecting unusual activity in the electrical grid management systems." This was it. The moment that would determine whether months of preparation and the most important briefing of my career would be enough to prevent a national catastrophe. "Hi, Ors. 14 servers neutralized," came the update from my team. 15! Only 2 command centers remained active, but one of them was the Shenzhen facility that was simultaneously trying to trigger the attacks on our infrastructure. "Status on malware activation?" I asked. 60% complete, Rodriguez replied grimly. "They're good, Marcus, really good." President Martinez stood beside me now, watching the battle unfold in lines of code and data streams. "Is there anything else we can do?" "Just wait and trust my team," I said. "They're the best in the world at this." 16 down! Dr. Chen's voice was strained with concentration. "Just Shenzhen remaining, but they're at 75% activation." The final moments of the operation compressed into a digital knife fight between the most sophisticated cyber weapons ever deployed. Our adaptive viruses clawing their way through defenses that were simultaneously trying to complete their own mission of destruction. 80% activation, Rodriguez warned. Marcus, whatever's going to happen, it needs to happen now. I could see the sweat beading on President Martinez's forehead. Secretary Williams had moved to a direct phone line, ready to coordinate emergency responses if our attack failed. General Patterson was already reviewing contingency plans for martial law declaration. 85%, 90%, oh no, they're almost. The orange dot on our map suddenly went dark. Target neutralized. Dr. Chen's voice exploded through the comm. All 17 command and control servers are down. The malware is orphaned. The briefing room erupted in cautious celebration. Without command and control infrastructure, the malware embedded in our systems was harmless. Sophisticated code with no way to receive activation signals. Confirm status, I said, wanting to be absolutely certain. Confirmed, Rodriguez replied. All attack vectors are neutralized. The threat has been eliminated. President Martinez closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and extended her hand to me. Mr. Whitmore, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you. Just doing my job, ma'am. No, she said seriously. What you just accomplished goes far beyond anyone's job description. You and your team may have prevented one of the worst attacks on American infrastructure in our history. Secretary Williams approached, with obvious relief. Mr. Whitmore, I owe you an apology. When I first read your threat assessment, I thought you might be overstating the danger. I was wrong. General Patterson nodded in agreement. Son, I've seen a lot of heroes in my time. Tonight you and your team saved more lives than most soldiers ever will. The compliments felt surreal after years of operating in secrecy, of being the invisible guardian that most people never knew existed. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. Ma'am, I said to the president, would it be possible to use a secure line to contact my family? They're probably worried. She smiled. Of course. Agent Morrison can set that up for you. 20 minutes later, I was speaking to my grandfather from a secure phone in the Presidential Communications Center. Marcus? Theodore's voice sounded older than usual. Are you all right? I'm fine, Grandpa. The meeting went well. Meeting, he repeated. Marcus, we've been talking since you left, trying to understand what just happened tonight. I could hear other voices in the background. My aunts and uncles and cousins, all gathered in the same foyer where they'd laughed at my appearance just hours earlier. I know it's a lot to process, I said. A lot to process? Bradley's voice came through the speaker. Marcus, the Secret Service took you to meet the president. About national security, and we spent the evening making fun of your clothes. About that, I said, unable to resist a small smile. I hope you understand now why I chose to walk tonight. I wanted one last evening of being just Marcus, the family disappointment, before everything changed. Family disappointment, Patricia's voice sounded horrified. Marcus, you're a hero. You work for the government protecting people. How could we have been so blind? Because that was the whole point, I explained. The work I do requires absolute secrecy. The best way to maintain that secrecy was to let you think I was exactly what I appeared to be. But all those times we offered you money or suggested you needed help finding a better job, Emma's voice trailed off. I know, and I appreciate that you cared enough to worry about me, even when you thought I was failing at life. Theodore's voice came back on the line. Marcus, can you tell us what happened tonight? What was so important that the president needed to see you immediately? I thought about the 17 command servers my team had just destroyed, about the millions of people who would wake up tomorrow morning with no idea how close they'd come to losing everything that made modern life possible. I can't give you details, Grandpa, but I can tell you that something very bad was prevented tonight, something that could have hurt a lot of people. And you stopped it? My team and I stopped it, yes. There was a long pause, then Theodore's voice again, stronger now. I've never been more proud to be your grandfather. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. After years of maintaining distance, of letting them believe I was less than I was. Hearing genuine pride in his voice felt like coming home. "Thank you, sir. That means everything to me." "When will you be back?" Susan asked. "When can we see you again?" I looked around the secure facility, thinking about the debriefings that would follow, the congressional hearings that would need classified testimony, the ongoing work of protecting infrastructure that most people took for granted. "Soon," I said, "but things will be different now. I won't be able to pretend anymore." "Good," Bradley said firmly. "We don't want you to pretend anymore. We want to know who you really are." "You do know," I replied. "I'm still the same person who walked 12 miles to dinner. I just happen to have a job that most people don't know about." After ending the call, I sat in the quiet communications center for a few minutes, processing everything that had happened. A few hours ago, I'd been the black sheep of the family, arriving on foot to mockery and condescension. Now I was a national security asset who had personally briefed the president and helped prevent a catastrophic attack. Agent Morrison appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore? The president would like to see you before you leave." I found President Martinez in a smaller office adjacent to the briefing room, reviewing reports on her tablet. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I wanted to speak with you privately." "Yes, ma'am." "What you accomplished tonight was extraordinary. But I'm curious about something. Your family clearly had no idea about your work. That must have been difficult, maintaining that kind of secrecy." "Sometimes," I admitted, "but it was necessary." "Was it, though?" She leaned back in her chair. "I mean, obviously operational security is important. But letting your own family think you were unsuccessful, letting them worry about you, that's a heavy burden to carry. The alternative was putting them at risk. People who know about classified operations can become targets themselves." "True. But there's another alternative we haven't discussed." I waited for her to continue. "How would you feel about a more public role? Leading a new cybersecurity initiative that operates in the open, with congressional oversight and public awareness? You'd still be protecting the country, but you wouldn't have to hide it anymore." The offer took me completely by surprise. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. The threats you've been dealing with are getting worse and more frequent. Soon, we won't be able to handle them with small secret teams. We need a major national initiative, led by someone with your expertise and track record. Someone who can work with Congress, speak to the public, build the infrastructure we need to defend against future attacks. A public position. Very public. Think Director of National Cybersecurity, with cabinet-level access and the ability to speak openly about the threats we face. No more pretending to be someone you're not." I thought about my family, still gathered at the estate, finally understanding who I really was. I thought about the years of secrecy, of watching them worry about my future while I protected theirs. Would I still be able to work directly on operations like tonight? "You'd oversee them all," she said. "Every major cyber threat, every infrastructure protection initiative, every defensive measure we deploy. You'd be the public face of America's cybersecurity efforts." It was an opportunity beyond anything I'd ever imagined. A chance to step out of the shadows and lead the fight against cyber threats on a national scale. "I'd need to think about it," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Marcus?" She stood and extended her hand again. "Whatever you decide, know that your country is grateful for your service tonight." 2 hours later, I was back in Newport, standing outside the Whitmore estate as dawn broke over the Atlantic. The Secret Service detail had departed, the helicopters were gone, and the only evidence of the night's extraordinary events was the memory of what had transpired. I walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell, still wearing the same jeans and Rhode Island clam shack t-shirt that had caused so much concern hours earlier. Theodore opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the window. "Marcus," he said simply, then pulled me into the first real hug we'd shared since I was a child. "I'm proud of you, grandson. Not because of what you do for work, but because of who you are." Behind him, I could see the rest of the family gathering in the foyer again, the same space where they'd laughed at my appearance, where everything had changed when the Secret Service arrived. But now they weren't laughing. They were looking at me with respect, with admiration, and with something that looked like love. So, Bradley said with a sheepish grin, I guess walking 12 miles isn't such a crazy idea after all. Actually, I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. I think I might drive next time. The laughter that followed was different from before, warm, inclusive, and filled with the understanding that family is about more than appearances, more than expectations, more than the assumptions we make about each other. Sometimes the people who walk through our doors on foot are exactly the ones we need the most. And sometimes, saving the world starts with simply showing up as yourself. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.